So some of the other comorbid conditions going along with Tourette. Learning disabilities. Eric's first diagnosis was actually learning disability. He was diagnosed with learning disability in 4th grade. And I figured, of course, he'd have a learning disability. I'm a learning disability specialist. I called a girlfriend and I said, he's got processing speed. He's got a bunch of stuff. Would you test him for me, please? So she tested him. I took all the test results to our district, and they said, oh, what are we going to do with him? So I wrote an IEP and said, why don't you do this? They never quite knew what to do with that child. Any type of learning disability could be present. We're going to talk about that. Assessment should absolutely be done. A full psychological educational battery needs to be done. And the interesting thing about learning disability and kids with Tourette is they tend to have average to above average intelligence. So dysgraphia, if you look at my son's handwriting, it's just scribbles. My brother's handwriting has always been scribbles. In fact, my brother's 2 initials are SS, and that's his entire signature, SS. I can read those too. Very slow, laborious, finger cramping. Remember, there's sometimes hand tics. The handwriting is just a hoot. Some of the key issues, though, is the inability to copy correctly from the board or from papers. Some of that has to do with eye tics and different kinds of things. So dysgraphia is a significant issue, and the ability to really get the thoughts on paper. God bless computers. This is what has saved our children, has been computer technologies. This is the one mistake that I completely admit that we made. Never was on the radar screen when my son was in 4th grade or even later when he was diagnosed. They need a diagnosis by an occupational therapist, evaluation by an occupational therapist to see what kinds of therapies can help. That was a significant mistake that we made. That would have helped tremendously. Extra assistance in class, scribing. I know that on the FCAT you can have a scribe, but you have to be doing it during the class day as well. Computer technology helps tremendously. Many kids have computers at home, not all. You need to figure out if a child does not have a computer at home, how you can help him. Little things like Alpha Smarts are very, very helpful. My son ended up going to high school about an hour and 15 minutes from our house in good weather. He did not go to the public high school because of his tics and all of the Tourette. And we got him an Alpha Smart. And he did all his homework on an Alpha Smart. An Alpha Smart has a cable you hook up to a computer, and the Word document shows up on the computer. It's a great little device, and they're very inexpensive. It's a form of an assistive technology that really, really works for kids with dysgraphia. So there are many different things that can be used. I'm currently working in a teeny tiny little school for kids with who are severely emotionally disturbed. And we let them play video games as a coping skill or as a reward, but they have to do 10 thumbs, which is a keyboarding program, before they can play. So keyboarding early is a really, really important thing to do. And using the computer in class. How many of you have computers in your schools? Do most of you? Good. I'd like to think that everybody does, but I know they don't. So dysgraphia is very, very common for kids with Tourette's. Processing speed. This is a really interesting disability. So many of us, most of us, when we're thinking, think this way. We recall things this way. Kids with a processing speed disorder will remember things this way. This is the kid that you're trying to teach the multiplication facts to and is having such a difficult time learning the multiplication facts. Eric never learned the multiplication facts, but he can do calculus. I know the multiplication facts beautifully. What's the next line? I can't do calculus. It's really interesting. Once we gave him a calculator, which was part of his IEP, he took off in math because the issue was the multiplication facts. And a first grade teacher who told him that he couldn't do math, but that's a whole other story. So processing speed, difficulty following directions, processing information. Sometimes noisy environments are very difficult for kids with processing speed. They have difficulty being able to focus on what you're saying because they're getting all the distraction of what's around them. Responding quickly. These are the kids that you ask a question, you have to use wait time. Wait time Teachers, please, if there's one thing you walk away from today other than a lot about Tourette, is wait time. It is the greatest gift to children. Kids need wait time. It's the one thing when I was doing teacher evaluation, I was always looking for wait time, and I always told the teachers in our pre-conference, I'll be looking to see your wait time. Wait time is really, really important for kids in order to have an opportunity to think about a cogent, good answer. Kids with processing speed really need some time to think about an answer. And sometimes processing speed, they're having difficulty perceiving what you're actually saying. It's not a hearing difficulty. They're not necessarily perceiving exactly what you're saying. Providing extra time for response. Developing a plan. So, for example, I would say to a young person, if I was I'm in a classroom, and I'm going to, what's your name?
Robert.
Robert. So Robert's a student with processing speed disorder. And I know that Robert knows the answer to the question. I'm going to ask him who was the 16th president of the United States. So I'm having a conversation with you in history, and I come over to Robert and I say very quietly, I'm going to ask you in a minute who's the 16th president of the United States. And I walk away and continue our conversation, and then I come back and I say to Robert in front of the whole class who's not heard me say to him previously, Robert, who's the 16th president of the United States?
I was hoping you'd give me the answer.
Abraham Lincoln. Believe it's Lincoln. Robert has a chance to process that question because I've given him that question before I ask it of the whole class. So I know that Robert knows the question. He appears to be as smart as he is, and he's had the opportunity to think that through. That's the processing speed issue. And that's really, really important to give that cue. It's the subtle cueing and prompting. It's very quietly walking up. That's why you want the kid to have a preferential seat, so you know where he is. It's going up to him and very quietly, him or her, going up to them and saying whatever you want them to be cued about. You know, in 5 minutes, we're going to move from individual work to group work. Just wanted to let you know. It's taking away from what the issues could be by giving them that cue, that subtle information that everybody else in the room doesn't necessarily need. And that's important to do. How many of you are visual learners? Me too. How many of you are auditory learners? God bless you. How'd you get that way? I don't understand auditory learners. How many of you really are both? Okay. I'm a totally visual learner. I take no information in auditorily. One of the things to do is provide concrete auditory and visual examples because you want to hit everybody in your classroom or everybody that you're speaking to. That's why I do a PowerPoint, because otherwise I can't talk. I have to be able to see it. Preferential seating, encouraging a student to ask for clarification. Encourage all of your students. Did you get that? Did you really understand that? Everybody who understands it, give me thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs in the side. That's asking for clarification without asking for one particular student. If there is that there are those one or two students in your class, again, it's going over and doing the cueing, the prompting by that one or two students. That's one of the ways that you handle the processing difficulties. It's by getting to them individually. Social skills deficits. Kids with Tourette are really, really interesting. Some of them, they do great with adults. They know how you're going to respond to them. So they do very, very well with adults. In Eric's kindergarten evaluation, the evaluator wrote, he's like a little adult. I wasn't really happy with that. I was really unhappy with that. But the reality was she was right. He was undiagnosed, but he was born with Tourette, so a lot of the characteristics were there. He had a difficult time knowing how to interact with his peers. I don't tell him that, but he had some social skills deficit. He's more than made up for it now. But some of the social immaturity, the ability to interact with adults better, very often they do experience social rejection because they don't know how to interact, and they're ticking. And kids don't know what to do with kids who are ticking. So it compounds itself and becomes a social skills deficit, and they can miss social cues. Any speech and language pathologists? Yay, love you people. Speech and language, pragmatic language support, meaning teach the child how to engage in a conversation. And that's what speech and language pathologists do with pragmatic language support. They literally teach kids how to interact. And it's a wonderful gift that they give these kids, because very often they don't know how to interact with their peers. It's a really important thing to do. School psychologists and speech and language pathologists also use social stories to help kids get through what's going to happen in a classroom or on the field trip or in other kinds of environments. Social skills groups, lunch bunch, bringing a small group of kids together so that a child with social skills issues, the kid with Tourette who's really on his own and feeling isolated, has a peer group that they can have lunch with, that they can have a social interaction with, where they can learn the skills that they can then generalize into a larger social situation. Focusing on child's strengths. You'll meet Kathy later, whose son is a drummer. He's a phenomenal drummer and has created his own business around his ability around drums. He's in a band. He does something called a drum circle. Kathy and her family took his interest, and this has become a part of his way of life. My son was a photographer. He and a friend of ours built a darkroom in our house, in a small closet in our basement. When Eric was in, I always knew where Eric was when he was developing his photographs, because I didn't hear any ticking. When he was developing his photographs, his tics stopped because he was so focused. It was really interesting. And a safe classroom environment is really key. We go back to the very, very beginning of the session when we look at the Hayam-Ginat statement about the weather in the classroom and being you control the weather in that classroom, you create the safe classroom environment. If it's a safe classroom environment, a child with social skills issues and Tourette feels safer, things are better. Sensory issues. How many of you are thrilled that they now make t-shirts that don't have tags? Yeah. You know, I put a jacket on, that tag just sticks out a little bit. I'm always going like this. I passed on all of Eric's clothes, except they didn't have a tag in them, so nobody ever knew what size they were. I also had to find socks that didn't have ridges, because the ridges, he would take the socks off. Didn't matter what the weather was, the socks would come off until I found the socks that didn't have ridges. So that's a very common sensitivity. Certain kinds of food didn't feel good in his mouth. Some kids are very sensitive to fluorescent lights. They hear the lights. As well as the lights blinking, they can hear the sound of the lights. Sensory tics. Eric's cuticles are, I've offered to take him for manicures. He kind of laughs at me. But he picks at his cuticles all the time, picks at scabs all the time. Those are sensory tics. I knew a woman who had Tourette's who would put her hands under scalding hot water. She needed the sensory feel. It's a sensory kind of tic, part of a sensory issue. Very difficult, we go back to this again and again, highly overstimulating environments, the cafeteria, the gym, the hallways. These are difficult places for kids with sensory issues and the need for sensory input. Sometimes they'll run into things. They'll purposely do that to get sensory input. Again, occupational therapists, hopefully who has some background in sensory issues, most of them do. Some things to do. Leaving class early. Now I've mentioned it now 4 times. The chaotic environments, place to eat that's separate. They may need a headset. At my little school, we have a couple of little guys who wear buffers just because the sound around them makes them unable to focus on their work. Ask the child what will help. It really does help.